final speaker for this morning's session, who is our phenomenal Gijsbert, who's dialing in from Brussels. Gijsbert, I don't know if you have slides that you want to share, or if you're just speaking to us. That's fantastic. If you've got slides, now is a good time to click those buttons. Gijsbert, actually knows a number of us very well, working on a variety of different projects, ostensibly around change. But what Gijsbert is going to do is to roll everything that we've been hearing together by talking about, as we can see on the screen in front of us, the cultural dimensions of trust. So with that, a round of applause for the fantastic Gijsbert. Thank you very much. Oh, and for some reason, Gijsbert, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
We can indeed. Fabulous.
That's a very important part I want to talk about. Trust is rooted in reliability. I don't trust my Jabra speaker because it's not reliable, clearly. No, first of all, thank you very much, Sarah, for your wonderful introduction and for the opportunity to speak here. Trust in mineral value chains, and I think in general, I think is a very pertinent topic, and we find ourselves in an enormous or tremendous transition along social, environmental, economical, and geopolitical dimensions. In the energy transition, but there's many more aspects of this. We think about metals and about energy, and actually this is a kind of a top layer of substance, which is of course very valid. But in the end, we are groups of people who base our decisions and going through this transformation, base our decisions on emotions and on trust. So I think there it's very important topic to talk about. And this transition it's a global challenge, and understanding trust, perception, and decision making in a multicultural or international context, I think is useful. So this is what I would like to talk about today, and hopefully also discuss with you. I'll look at some of the internet or multicultural dimensions of this, and I'll come to this a bit later. So perhaps some background to myself. By training, I'm an engineer in mining and metals, or mineral processing and recycling specifically. And over the past 15 plus years, I've been working in in a variety of companies and countries. Always looking at building new teams, new organizations, departments, and also transforming existing ones. So this was always about finding a combination between technical content and articulating ideas and getting people on board and making it a common goal and to make a step forward and also make this change last. So about a year ago, I created Plutonic Raw Materials Advisory, which is a boutique advisory firm focusing on supporting organizations to make the energy transition. And sometimes this has very technical aspects, as in minerals and metals, etc., or energy, and sometimes, and at the same time, this also has a lot of other dimensions. There might be financial, regulatory risk, of course, as where Satara is very active, and also other things that relate to how do we communicate and how do we create a common basis to provide an emotional basis for making better decisions. And these decisions have then rational drivers, but the foundation is emotional, based in trust and communication. So these are the areas I work in. Now, if you think about trust and what trust means, and I enjoyed listening over the past days and also today to several of the speakers. If you look at what trust, or not look, but listen rather, or feel what trust means to yourself. If you think about trust or trustworthy experience with somebody or with yourself, and you listen to your body or feel your body, you feel that distrust brings a kind of a closing emotion, and you shield and you do this kind of fight, flight, freeze type of reaction. While trust is a much warmer emotion that opens up and brings clarity and also brings creativity. And this is something we need during a transition, because if you make decisions based on when you're afraid, it's like going to the supermarket when you're hungry. You make short-term decisions which are usually not the best ones in the long term. So I think it's a very, very critical mineral, so to say, to talk about trust and to include a much more opening and positive element in our transition. Now, trust is rooted in a very in a part of the brain, essentially, where we don't really form words. Even though I did make an effort to put some words there, some of the previous speakers also mentioned some of these. For example, integrity, competence, and benevolence. That the other party has a positive intent with where you want to go. We also need to communicate these things, have shared values, common goals, and you might need to negotiate and develop this. And last but not least, trust is also rooted in predictability. Now, we need to be careful here that this also is often linked or misconstrued as likability. So often it's the case that if you trust somebody, you also like this person, but likability does not mean trustworthiness. So trustworthiness is rooted in predictability, which is rooted in competence and diligence. So can this person or thing, as with my Jabra speaker, actually do the job when you want it, and is there some clarity in there that you can rely on this process or person? So these are a couple of important things to keep in mind. And also, what a couple of other speakers referred to is how then these are, elements of trust. That's all fine and useful, but we also need to do something with it. We need to process this internally. We need to process this through our internal emotional basis or lens, if you will. And this is where perception comes in. Trust and perception are also two important linked concepts that we need for better decision making. Now, perception is written here a couple of perspectives on what perception can mean. It refers to how we interpret and make sense of the information that we see or perceive. This relates to what Vanessa mentioned earlier during her talk. She talked about belief and confidence in reality and reliability. She called it logic. So this is sense. Does it make sense? Can we do something concrete with what we see? We also see everything around us through a lens. It's filtered, right? It's filtered through past experiences, through beliefs, through cultural background. I think the first presentation by Alison, she talked about authenticity and taking into account trauma, and particularly in stakeholder management and interaction, and for example, in permitting of plants and mines and other changes. This is very important. And these are key drivers in decision making. Now, these are all generic concepts and I think are useful to understand, but what can we do, practically with this? What can you do and what can I do when you land in a say a multicultural project? And sometimes a multicultural project can also mean other types of differences. So not necessarily different countries, but also can be the north or the south of a country, or genders, or different generations of people. So these are useful. So I'll share just some useful tools that I found helpful to better understand and deal with these differences, and preferably also leverage them and have a good laugh about it. I hope they might be a bit small, but I hope you can see these are just two frameworks that you can use to visualize and understand, and preferably also have some fun with it. These cultural differences. On the left, you see a framework called The Culture Map by Erin Meyer, who has a fantastic book, by the way, that I recommend, and also some really good YouTube videos. So do look that up, where she defines cultural differences along 7 dimensions. So you have here how you communicate. Is that low context, high context? Do you explain everything? So, for example, American versus Japanese. And as a Dutch person, there's also very big differences here. As you can see here in orange on the left, there's Dutch, and a lot of others are on the right. So you need to watch out for big differences, right? And as Sarah mentioned, I also work in some projects with Sitarla, also on change. So there you can see these things directly. You know, I'm a Dutch national. I lived abroad for many years now, but still, some of my cultural and emotional base is in the Dutch culture. And when working with some of my British and Irish colleagues, you talk about, for example, when you say something like, "Oh, that's very interesting. Perhaps you can also." So the Dutch person thinks, "Great, that thing was interesting. That was all good. We focus on that main point." And the British person might have actually meant the thing, "Oh, but also look at X, Y, Z." So these type of tools helps you visualize what different people mean, how you can engage with different people, and how you can create a kind of an open channel of trust, and you know, also have some fun with it, I think. On the right hand side, you see another framework by Geert Hofstede. It's called Country Comparison, where he maps out differences between countries along these dimensions that you see here. For example, power distance, it is hierarchy, conflict avoidance, or uncertainty avoidance, masculinity, which does not necessarily mean facial hair or deepness of voice, but how you make decisions do you do that in a consensual way as a group, or do you do it in a different way? There's big differences, and of course these are all kind of generalizations, and you also need to look at your own specific personal differences. But these are some very helpful tools to kind of address the elephant in the room that a lot of people might not even know is there, and that you can take into account and work under different conditions. One practical example is I was working with a French colleague and talking about different ideas, new ideas, and the Dutch are very much focused on trying out new ideas fast and trying, failing fast type of approach. While the French came across to me as a Dutch person as a very negative. It was always like, that doesn't work, and this is a problem, and that's stupid. And well, he didn't use those words, but it was a very negative tone. Because in general, of course, this is a generalization as well, French people provide value to a group by pointing out the dangers. So imagine you're walking through a forest, a Dutch person will happily run around and collect mushrooms, probably, or something, some other kind of thing. And the French person might point out, like, be careful, there's a bear, be careful, there's a dangerous tree, or whatever. So if you can, these type of tools will help you place this in a very practical and often also funny context, so that you can understand each other and place this and not react to this negativity that, this French person is always so negative, but say, okay, maybe this has a point, and maybe I need to identify that as a risk and do something with it. So then you can move from more, say, closed judgmental environment to a more open, creative and positive environment. So I hope these are a couple of things that I've hit my head a couple of times in different contexts, and I hope that these tools can be useful for others as well. In light of time, I'll just leave it at that. These are some of my contact informations, and I would be very happy if you contact me to talk about these things or other challenges that you might be facing, and happy to always have an or preferably personal coffee.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Gijsbert. Round of applause, everybody. I'm in the middle of laughing. I think this is going to go on for a while. This picture of the Dutch all running around picking mushrooms and the French saying, "No, watch out for the bear." Yeah. Watch out for the bear. I think this is just beautiful. So is this something, Gijsbert, where so obviously in that particular situation, and we're saying this with much love and respect, by the way, in case anybody is listening to this out of context, in that situation, actually the Dutch person and the French person working together are much stronger because they've got different strengths, but there actually may be some tension between the two of them, because the Dutch person is probably looking at the French person saying, you lazy person, why aren't you picking mushrooms? And the French person's looking at the Dutch person saying, you're a total idiot, there's a bear standing over there. So is there something here in terms of there's initial tension, but actually by working together, there's strength?
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think, there is, I think maybe an overall conserved amount of energy, and you can choose where you put this. So you can put this on conflict, on judging each other, on saying, well, no, there's a bear there, and the Dutch person might be picking mushrooms. Although arguably you might want to eat some mushrooms before a bear eats you, but that's another thing that you had some experience with polar bears, I think. But apart from that, I think frameworks of looking at these type of interactions in a less personal way gives you an opportunity to take this energy that in a kind of a short-term reaction you would use in a negative way, like by judging somebody or by being angry or upset or whatever. You can move this to a more constructive thing, like by building trust and by using this energy in a positive way, by actually leveraging these different perspectives you see from different in a situation. So if there is anything like an overall, like a total truth, or however you want to call this, maybe this exists, maybe it doesn't, but in any case, we all have different perspectives of this same blob of thing we're dealing with, right? So these kind of tools, I think, can be helpful to support each other and to go to a more holistic approach of the situation.
No, I very much agree. And I think all of us were there taking down the notes of the different tools that you'd used there. I don't know, Vanessa, maybe if we can bring you into the conversation, because as Vanessa let us or be aware of, so Vanessa's currently sitting in Western Australia. But we can probably tell from Vanessa's accents, Australia is not where Vanessa necessarily grew up. Vanessa, in terms of the tool that Gijsbert had on the left-hand side of his slide, so well, actually on the right as well, comparing, I guess, the characteristics at a very general level of different countries, different nations. Have you ever used any of these tools before, or have you been seeing them used either be it for good purposes or also for bad purposes? I don't know if you've got any thoughts.
Yeah, it's a really good one, and the one that you had on the left, I think, Erin, I couldn't get her surname, but I've seen a similar one just in terms of the trust scale, and when you start looking at a sort of very generalistic view of where people trust initially. So very much, I think you had 7 different elements. I've seen one that just looks at trust, where in their communication style, and I'll say that I'm a South African, not by birth, but by where I grew up, and I'll say that that's sort of in the middle. But when I first got to Australia, for example, I was told I was very direct. I'm like, don't understand that. And then now that I've been in Australia for sort of 5 or 10 years, it's like, I don't know where that sort of comes from, because, maybe it's not quite what you see is what you get. So I do think the tools that you have and those that you suggest we look at very much play into that sort of initial. Am I listening? How do I listen? Where does that person come from in terms of, the active listening is easy, but that reflective listening, I think, is important too, to just say, well, maybe somebody from Japan isn't quite going to get exactly what I say if I say it like that, versus somebody from the US, and I think it's very important that we take that into account. So maybe not exactly those tools, but definitely ones similar. And I think they're very, very helpful.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Vanessa. Gijsbert, do you have anything in response? And then I'll bring in Amanda to the conversation.
Yeah, I think you're right, Vanessa. And one, I think, interesting thing you pointed at also, as a sort of South African in Australia, that a lot of people or a lot of cultures think of themselves as very direct, or where that might actually not be the case, or it's not so simple. For example, the Dutch tend to be quite direct, or be perceived as direct, confrontational, as a former British colleague of mine called it. Very confrontational until there is a confrontation. He found it very interesting in important discussions that there was, Dutch and British in the same room, and the Dutch were very abrasive and confrontational until the Brit finally gets up and, okay, now we fight, and the Dutch will go. So it's very much that aspect of understanding, and there's just a couple of dimensions that you can use, but there's, of course, it's a much broader picture. But
yeah, no, it's really interesting, isn't it, Gijsbert? Because I think that it's a blind spot for many of us when we don't quite realise that we might be being perceived in a very different way to how we're perceived, perhaps at home or by our families or whatever. Amanda, do you want to come in on this? And I don't know if it's got anything to do with your surname.
Italians and Dutch are two absolutely different sides of the cultural spectrum, and as I learned in business school, it's like being a schizophrenic. But what I would say is that this is actually a lot more important, I think, for the mining industry than most people realize. Mining is genuinely one of the most global industries on the planet, and you guys used to do you probably still do a great map of all of the different stakeholders involved in mining, which, civil societies at one side, and the understanding of meaning. I mean, we look at mines where what an Australian mining CEO and team says to a local community or a national government, and they're all speaking the same language, they're all speaking English, but what they all mean and what they all want and the context of what they want are all over the map, where you've got, even a South African engineer or metallurgist consultant telling them, well, these are these things, but because they didn't knock the Australian on the head, he didn't understand it was important. Right? I actually think understanding cultural context is something that everyone in our industry should be getting a bit of a training on, because there's so much miscommunication, because context and background is not considered when different, in this incredibly global industry that brings in so many stakeholders, and how much gets missed and how many projects get stopped and delayed because people speaking the same language simply didn't understand each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with that, Amanda, we've probably all got stories that we can share. I'm going to bring in Kimo in a second with regards to this. I worked on a project in West Africa, and it was a 50-50 joint venture, which is always dangerous, between a very large French company and an Australian company.
Oh, God.
Now, the Australians didn't speak really any French, and the French didn't want to speak any English. And that was just on a normal language basis before we got anywhere near differences with regards to culture. And then also as well, the culture of the environment in which that particular joint venture was operating, which was totally different to France and Australia as well. So there was so much that was being lost in translation because of the different backgrounds of those individuals. But coming back, maybe, Kimo, to your to bring you into the conversation, I'm still laughing at the Dutch picking mushrooms and the French pointing at the bears, but also as well the time it often takes to build that trust and that understanding between different groups. Now, I realize that Sweden is very different to Finland, but Rose and I were in Sweden probably about 6-9 months ago, I guess, Rose, and we were there for 3 days, having worked with a very large Swedish mining company, and we've been working with them probably for about 6-9 months. So we knew them, in a British context, you would know those people pretty well, even though it was all over Teams and Zoom. When we got to Sweden, it probably took us about 2.5 days, didn't it, Rose, for actually us to build that trust, or for them to trust enough in Rose and myself. As soon as we went past that tipping point of feeling comfortable with one another, I've never I've never received so much oversharing with regards to the communication and what those individuals felt with us. So suddenly we went from being external strangers, and I don't know what the tipping point was. It just happened like the snap of two fingers. Suddenly we were best friends, and being told about deep and personal secrets that from a British perspective, you would never share that with somebody else unless they were very, very close to you. So it was really interesting for Rose and myself, that sort of cultural differentiation. So that's my very ineloquent segue, Kimo, across to yourself. In Finland, where again, we've got very different cultural norms, and actually being able to work together can be really fascinating, saying, okay, well, what am I actually trying to say? And where am I inadvertently coming across as something slightly different? I don't know what you think.
Well, thank you. It was difficult. So I was relieved when I didn't find Finland in Gijsbert's analysis, because I was wondering what kind of results we would like to we would see. But I can't blame any of you if you don't understand Finns, because we can't understand ourselves, even ourselves. So I think that's good starting point for international cooperation, because we can't accept that someone should understand us, so we try to understand others. And that's, I guess, the way how we have survived in the world, living next to Russia as a part of the Western world. But to be honest, I think that what I heard about you talking about the differences, I think that I have heard a little bit similar stories, because TTK has had cooperation with experts from so many countries that there is some kind of silent knowledge that how is it to work and cooperate with French and British and German and so on and so on. But I think that this is something that it's nice to realize and nice to recognize and even nice to chat with. But anyhow, I return to my last sentences. The global challenges are so huge that we just need to realize that we are human beings and we need to work together to find the solutions that are needed. Anyway, I repeat that we are looking for cooperation, and we are just trying to share our experiences, our expertise, but it's really valuable that you can also learn to know each other as human persons. And I think that Finns are quite easy to cooperate. Usually we are quite straight and honest, even so honest that you can think that we are stupid. But that's good basic to build trust forward. And we may give idea that we are a little bit remote. During COVID, we were joking that it's so difficult for Finns to keep this 2.5 meter distance, because we are used to keep 5 meters distance. So, but once you get to know us, I think that you can find a little bit similar kind of things what Sarah thought about Swedes, that then we are very open, and we may tell things that you don't expect to take place. Let's see. Okay, this was opening from Finnish person.
That's fantastic, Kimo. Thank you. This is actually beginning to turn into a cultural understanding, and I think exactly as Olusola said in the chat, mining being global is made up of so many diverse traditions, cultures. And yes, I totally agree with you, Olusola, that actually we should be able to accommodate them. But actually, maybe it's the fact that we are so diverse. And actually, if we can be able to sort of crack that nut on, okay, how do we actually really listen to one another and then work together? That's the kind of innovation that we need and creativity that we need to be able to address some of these challenges that we've got. So I think it's really exciting, and us being able to laugh together is brilliant. So Vanessa, you've got your hand up. Do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, it really reminds me, and we smile about this, but two other elements to trust that we haven't really spoken about. And one is it needs to be replenished. It's almost like a friendship thing. You can't just build it and assume that it's just going to last. It actually needs maintenance in between. So and that's why when I spoke about it, it's a two-way street. Excuse me. So it was that sort of replenishment and nurturing as well. So it's not just there and it's going to stay there. It takes some work. But the other thing that I really was enjoying when we were talking about the cultural differences and you know, maybe the oversharing and all of that comes with different cultures is part of trust is also actually allowing yourself to be vulnerable. And if we do allow ourselves to be vulnerable, that sort of comes in with the bit of, you know, be yourself, be empathetic, be all of these things. But if you allow yourself to say, look, I don't know all of the answers. I actually don't know everything here. And I'm really at a bit of a loss here. So help me, kind of thing. I do think that that's an element of trust that sort of goes towards being able to build it and replenish it like a relationship.
And I guess with that, Vanessa, so in terms of, so if you're trying to build a solution or a way forward or something, if somebody is saying, no, but I'm the world leader on this, that's actually quite a difficult starting point, because it then means you have to go, yes, you got absolutely fantastic with regards to this. Just looking at some other areas where you could carry on being the world leader, or, those kind of things. And I say that as well because earlier on today, I was on a webinar, which was basically entitled Australia is the world's leader with regards to ESG. What do we think?
What do we think? I love that question.
Well, I think it was a case of, Australia is the world leader with regards to ESG differences between Northern and Southern Hemisphere. So I was brought in as somebody from the Northern Hemisphere to comment with regards to this. Now, that was really interesting because I think that Australia has lots and lots of strengths, but there are perhaps some areas of ESG where Australia, and again, being very general, isn't necessarily as strong as a nation they might like to think themselves to be. Now, being British, how do I say that? I don't turn around and say, Australia, you're talking a load of utter rubbish, blah, blah, blah. No, my natural inclination would be to say, how do I say this really politely?
Interesting.
Exactly. So this is, so, that's very interesting. So a British person saying, that's really interesting is code for saying, I don't really agree with you. And it gets even worse if we say, that's really interesting, building on that, which is code for saying, I didn't agree with you in the first place, and now I'm going to tell you the right answer. But it doesn't help that being British. And so therefore, yes, that the only language that I can really speak is English. Being British, we use the English language in such a difficult way because we don't actually say what we mean. We're not being straight. So I think, Vanessa, I totally agree with you. And it was a case of saying, well, how do you, if somebody's not willing to be vulnerable, or culturally it's quite difficult to be vulnerable, then actually it becomes more difficult to then build on that aspect of trust. Is that an interpretation of what you're saying?
I think you're absolutely right, because not everybody has that as a cultural background. So bringing the discussion sort of, I don't want to say full circle, but having all elements of that discussion, I think that's what we do. And it's navigating all of those elements together that we need to be better at, so that we get the right communication and we communicate that trust in a better way